So, when it comes to non-duality and non-duality circles and groups, etc., there can be a lot of differing opinions and perspectives around the role of practice, spiritual practice, if we want to call it that. Things like meditation is a big one, um, reading spiritual books, self inquiry. Are these necessary or not? Do they help or do they hinder? A lot of very different opinions around that. So I just wanted to reflect on that. Um, I'm not going to probably come away with a strong opinion one way or another here, um, because it's very related to something that I'll probably make a future video about, is the two sides of the proverbial non-dual coin, where, as Tony Parsons often says, all there is empty fullness, right? There's this paradox of emptiness and fullness, and again, there can be this apparent two sides of the coin in terms of how the apparent individuals perceive the pointing out of non-duality, which correlates closely to the opinions of whether or not practice is necessary. So I guess I'll start by talking about the role of practice when it comes specifically to non-duality. Now, one thing is that there is a very, very, very good chance that whomever it is that's talking about non-duality, this included, has done practice of some sort, perhaps a pretty intense practice. I haven't done any real intense practice, um, but there has been a certain level of devotion towards different things over the last 10 or so years, um, that have seemingly led to a cultivation of new perspective. Um, so that's something important to point out, is that most people who are talking about this, even the ones that are suggesting that no practice is necessary because it doesn't make sense with what non-duality is suggesting, they've probably gone through some sort of practice. So again, I'll be clear that I don't want to say that as a um, end all be all, thou shalt do practice, but it is a very interesting correlation. So that's maybe the first argument for practice, is it seems to be this correlation. Now, the argument against practice, when it comes to very pure and uncompromising non-duality, is who would there be that's practicing? So could it be seen that a practice is merely reinforcing that sense of separation, that I am here meditating, but who am I? And again, there is the practice of who am I, the self inquiry. But again, that when it comes to the really uncompromising, non-dual messaging, pointings in its most potent form, that is the question: is who is doing it? Who is doing anything? Who is making the decision to practice? who is having the discipline or motivation or whatever to do any sort of spiritual practice. So that's another argument, or that's one argument against practice, sort of the how it's incoherent with the maybe the most literal rendering of non-duality. Another one is probably one that I would say I resonate with more personally, because the other one is sort of a technicality to say, well, there is no one to practice. Eh, yeah, again, technically, the literal rendering of non-duality, yes, but experientially, there seems to be a seismic difference there. Now, the second argument, though, against that I resonate with a little bit more is that non-duality is a suggestion that this is already whole and complete, that nothing needs to change, that even though there may be the appearance of difficult circumstances, pain, suffering, that is all this. That is all the wholeness. That is all empty fullness, emptiness of any knowable essence or substance, but fullness in the sense of it is all of this, and there's no need at all for this. And often practice reinforces a need for things to be different. And it gets complicated because there is the arising of a desire to be more still. That's the big one for me, is like there to abide in a stillness of being that is just an open vessel for reality to go through, rather than like the typical monkey mind and mental noise that can dominate experience. So there is this very valid desire, I believe, for stillness and interior silence. But the the trick of that is, again, that is a desiring for this to be different. So in a sense, it's a rejection that this is already needlessly whole and complete. So when we're really strictly talking about non-duality, the the not to the collapse of the illusion of any separation, it an argument can be made that practice is again incoherent with that because it's already whole and complete. There is nothing that needs to change to make it any more whole and complete. So, that I guess that's now a few arguments I've listed, sort of maybe some interwoven there, because again, to reiterate, the argument for practice is that again it can bring about these realizations. So it's like, how do we even reach a point where any of this makes sense without having practiced? So is it like we have to practice up to a certain point and then it just drops and it's no longer necessary? And how would that be known? um, yeah, it's tricky. And then there's the more raw, moment by moment motivation to practice, to again just abide in a greater level of stillness, sort of like a mental health thing for this body mind to not be stressed and anxious and depressed. you could look at it like a healthy diet and exercise, that doing these spiritual practices can be helpful to the body and mind in terms of letting go of I don't know, little knots and anxieties and things like that that can again be sort of dissolved away through deepening into this sort of stuff. So again, I said at the outset that I'm not going to give a one clear opinion one way or another, because it's really nuanced, and it's very season of life. I guess if I'm going to give one opinion, it's very season oriented. So again, to say that most who are talking about non-duality in the way that in this more direct, even in the uncompromising way, for example, those that would say that there is no one to practice, they have practiced. So again, is there a season of life in which practice is necessary? If you're watching this video and you've really not had any sort of like awakening experience that has really shifted perception, it would probably be advisable to do some sort of practice. Not absolutely necessary, because nothing is absolutely necessary. Because again, this is already whole and complete. But if there is a desire to better grasp some of this stuff, practice would be helpful. Um, but again, there may be seasons where it seems like practice is impossible, where it seems as though what's happening, what's apparently happening, there is nothing to practice at all, and that's okay too. So again, I guess I'll leave it at that. That, you know, my opinion at least is it's very season season of life dependent on to practice or not to practice.